The construction of the pyramids, a slow deep dive. Good evening and welcome. Tonight, we're going to take a gentle journey back in time, to the banks of the Nile River, to a place where sand meets stone, and where human hands built monuments that would stand for thousands of years. This is not a story of mystery or impossible feats. This is a story of patience, of repetition, of time itself, measured not in hours, but in seasons, not in days, but in decades. Tonight, we'll walk slowly through the entire process of building the pyramids of ancient Egypt, from the first morning when surveyors arrived at an empty plateau, to the final stone placed at the summit, gleaming white against the desert sky. There is no rush here. We have all the time we need. So settle in, take a breath, and let us begin. The Nile at dawn. Picture, if you will, the eastern horizon over Egypt 4,500 years ago. The sky is still dark, but a thin line of pale gold has begun to appear where the desert meets the heavens. The air is cool, carrying with it the scent of water and silt. Along the banks of the Nile River, the world is just beginning to wake. The Nile itself is quiet at this hour. Its surface reflects the fading stars, smooth as polished bronze. This river is everything to the people who live beside it. It is their calendar, their highway, their source of life itself. Every year, with the predictability of the sun's movement across the sky, the Nile rises. Waters from distant mountains, from lands far to south, swell the river until it overflows its banks and floods a valley. And when those waters recede, they leave behind rich, black soil, dark and fertile, perfect for growing the grain that feeds a nation. This flooding defines Egyptian life. The year is divided into 3 seasons. Ake, the inundation, when the waters rise. Paret, the growing season, when seeds are planted in the moist earth. And Shimu, the harvest, when the grain is gathered before the cycle begins again. This rhythm has repeated for generations beyond counting, and it will repeat for generations to come. On this particular morning, along the stretch of the western bank where the desert plateau rises above the floodplain, a group of men have gathered. They are surveyors, architects, engineers, though they would not have used these words. They carry with them simple tools, ropes, wooden stakes, plumb bobs made of stone and cord, and measuring rods cut to the length of the royal cubit, from a man's elbow to the tip of his longest finger, approximately 52 centimeters. They have been sent here by the king himself, the pharaoh, who has decreed that a pyramid shall be built. Not just any pyramid, but one that will dwarf all others, a monument so vast that it will be visible from every direction, a mountain made by human hands. This pyramid will be the pharaoh's tomb, his eternal resting place, the vessel that will carry his soul into the afterlife and ensure his place among the gods. The men stand quietly, looking out over the land before them. The sun is rising now, casting long shadows across the desert. There is work to be done, much work, years of work, but there is no hurry. There is only the next step, and then the next, and then the next after that, choosing the site. The selection of where to build a pyramid was not a casual decision. It required careful consideration of many factors, both practical and spiritual. The site had to meet specific requirements, and the plateau these men now survey has been chosen for good reason. First, and most importantly, the ground beneath them is solid bedrock. Not sand, not loose soil, but living rock, the bones of the earth itself. This bedrock will serve as a foundation for millions of tons of stone. If the foundation were weak, if it were built on sand or clay that could shift or settle, the entire structure would be in danger. The weight of the pyramid would cause it to sink unevenly. Cracks would appear, and eventually, the monument could collapse. The bedrock here is limestone, the same material that will form the body of the pyramid, and it is strong enough to bear any burden. Second, the site sits on the western bank of the Nile. In Egyptian belief, the west is the direction of the setting sun, the direction of death and the afterlife. The pyramids, being tombs, naturally belong on this western side, the realm of the dead, while the living cities occupy the eastern bank where the sun rises each morning. Third, the plateau is elevated above the floodplain. When the Nile rises each year, the waters spread across the valley, but they do not reach this high ground. The construction site will remain dry even during the inundation. Yet the river is close enough, less than a kilometer away along a now-vanished branch of the Nile that ancient Egyptians knew as the Khufu branch. This proximity to water is essential because the Nile will serve as a highway that brings stone and supplies to the pyramid site. Fourth, there are quarries nearby. The plateau itself contains deposits of limestone suitable for the bulk of the pyramid's construction. The ancient surveyors can see the stone beneath their feet, waiting to be cut and shaped. There are also quarries at Tura, across the river, where fine white limestone can be obtained for the outer casing that will give the finished pyramid its smooth, gleaming surface. The men spend days examining the site, walking its perimeter, testing the rock, observing the land. They drive wooden stakes into the ground to mark corners and reference points. They stretch cord between the stakes, creating a grid that divides the space into manageable sections. This is slow, deliberate work. There can be no mistakes here. Everything that follows will depend on the accuracy of these first measurements. One of the surveyors, perhaps the chief architect, kneels and places his palm flat against the bedrock. The stone is warm from the sun. He can feel its solidity, its permanence. This rock has been here since before memory, since before the first people walked these banks. And on this rock, they will build something that will last just as long. Surveying and alignment. Once the site has been selected, the next task is to lay out the pyramid's base with perfect precision. This is where the true skill of the Egyptian engineers reveals itself. They possessed no modern instruments, no laser levels, no compasses. They had wood, stone, rope, and water, and with these simple materials, they achieved a level of accuracy that would not be matched for thousands of years. The base of the Great Pyramid of Khufu is not quite, but almost a perfect square. Each side measures approximately 230 meters. The difference between the longest and shortest sides is less than 20 centimeters. The corners are almost exactly 90 degrees. And perhaps most remarkably, the entire base is leveled to within just a few centimeters across its entire 13-acre footprint. Modern construction methods, using laser levels and computer-aided design, can barely improve on this precision. How did they achieve this? The answer lies in patience and in observing the natural world. To create a level foundation, the ancient builders likely used water. Water always finds its own level. It is a fundamental law of nature, as reliable as the rising sun. One theory suggests that workers dug shallow trenches in a grid pattern across the site and filled these trenches with water. Any rock that protruded above the waterline could then be cut away. The water was lowered, more rock removed, and the process repeated until the entire surface was perfectly flat. Another method involved using water-filled channels, along with measuring rods and plumb bobs, to ensure that reference points across the site were all at exactly the same height. The result was a foundation that could support the immense weight to come without settling unevenly. The bedrock itself required minimal preparation. Where it was uneven, it was leveled. Where it was too low, paving blocks were added to bring the surface up to the correct height. Aligning the pyramid with the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, required a different technique. The Egyptians had no magnetic compass. The North Star that we use today, Polaris, was not in the correct position 4,500 years ago due to the slow wobble of Earth's axis. But the ancient astronomers understood the movements of the heavens. They watched the stars. The method most likely involved observing circumpolar stars, stars that never set below the horizon, but instead circle around the celestial pole. By carefully tracking these stars' positions throughout the night and marking their rising and setting points on the horizon, the surveyors could calculate true north with extraordinary accuracy. Some scholars suggest they use a tool called a merkit, a sighting instrument that consists of a bar with a plumb bob attached, used in combination with a palm rib to sight along. Others propose they observe the shadow cast by a vertical pole throughout the day, marking points where the shadow touched the ground, then bisecting the angle to find the north-south line. Whatever the exact method, the result speaks for itself. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an error of less than 1/10 of a single degree. The other sides align perfectly with the other cardinal directions. This was not luck. This was skill, accumulated over generations of building, refined with each new pyramid until the technique reached its peak during the Fourth Dynasty. The surveyors spend weeks, perhaps months, establishing these alignments. They work mostly at night, when the stars are visible. They work at dawn and dusk, when shadows are long and easy to track. During the heat of the day, they rest. There is no hurry. The pyramid will take 20 years to complete. A few extra weeks spent ensuring perfect alignment at the beginning will save countless problems later. Slowly, the outline of the pyramid begins to take shape on the ground. Stakes mark the corners. Ropes stretch between them to find the edges. The four sides of the square have been measured and measured again, adjusted until they are as close to equal as human hands can make them. The foundation has been leveled. The alignment with the stars has been checked and verified. The site is ready. Construction can begin. Quarrying the stone. The pyramid will be built of stone. Millions of blocks, each weighing on average about 2.5 tons. Some much smaller, others enormous, weighing as much as 15 or even 40 tons. All of this stone must be quarried. cut from the living rock, shaped, transported, and lifted into place. It is a task that will employ thousands of workers for 2 decades. The quarries are not far from construction site. Some of the limestone comes from the Giza Plateau itself, close enough that workers can see the emerging pyramid from where they cut the stone. Other limestone, finer and whiter, comes from Tura on the opposite bank of Nile. Granite, which will be used for the burial chambers deep inside the pyramid, comes from much farther away, from Aswan, nearly 800 kilometers to the south. In the quarry, the work begins before dawn when the air is still cool. Men arrive carrying tools: copper chisels, wooden mallets, stone hammers made of dolerite, ropes, wooden wedges, and water jars. They work in teams, each team responsible for cutting and removing a certain number of blocks each day. The stone they work with is limestone, a sedimentary rock formed from ancient sea creatures that lived millions of years ago. It is relatively soft as stone goes, which makes it possible to cut with the tools available. But it is still stone, and cutting it is hard, slow work. The process begins by selecting a section of the quarry face where the stone appears sound, without too many cracks or flaws. The masons mark out the dimensions of the block they want to cut, roughly rectangular, perhaps 1.5 meters long, 1 meter wide, and 1 meter tall. First, they cut a deep channel around 3 sides of block, leaving it attached to the bedrock only at the bottom. To do this, they use copper chisels and stone hammers. Copper is softer than limestone, but it doesn't have to be harder. The workers don't simply pound the chisel against the rock. Instead, they use an abrasive. They place quartz sand, which is much harder than limestone, into the cut and work the copper chisel back and forth through the sand. The hard quartz particles grind away at the limestone, slowly deepening the groove. It is painstaking work. A single deep cut might take several workers an entire day. As the channels around the block grow deeper, reaching perhaps 0.5 meter down into the stone, the workers prepare to separate the block from the bedrock below. One method uses wooden wedges. Workers drive dry wooden wedges into holes drilled along the bottom edge of the block, then pour water over the wedges. The water soaks into the wood, causing it to expand. Slowly, steadily, the expanding wedges exert enormous pressure on the stone. After several hours, or perhaps overnight, there's a sharp crack, and the block breaks free from the bedrock. Another method, used when the stone has natural cracks or bedding planes, involves using copper tools and stone hammers to drive wedges along these natural weak points, leveraging the block free. Once separated, the block lies on its side in the quarry. It is rough, its surface is uneven. Workers using copper chisels and dolerite pounders begin the process of shaping it, smoothing the faces that will be visible when the block is placed in the pyramid. Other faces, those that will be hidden against other blocks or buried inside the structure, are left rough. Why waste time smoothing what no one will ever see? The copper tools were down quickly. Copper is not a hard metal. A chisel might only be useful for a few hours of hard work before its edge becomes too blunt to cut effectively. Throughout the quarry, workers are constantly sharpening tools, grinding them against stone, or taking them back to the metalworkers' forges to be recast. Archaeologists estimate that for every 100 masons working stone, at least one person was employed full-time just keeping the tools sharp. When the stone is harder, when workers must cut into granite or basalt for special parts of the pyramid, copper tools alone are not enough. For these harder stones, the workers use dolerite, an extremely hard igneous rock. They fashion hammers and pounders from dolerite, heavy stones they can grip in both hands. Then, hour after hour, they pound the granite, literally pulverizing the surface one tiny chip at a time. It is exhausting work. The pounding echoes across the quarry, a steady rhythm like a slow heartbeat. Strike, 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 minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day. A single granite block might take a team of men a week or more to extract and rough shape. But there are many teams, and time is not the enemy. The work continues, steady and relentless. When one block is finished, they begin the next. The quarry face slowly recedes as more and more stone is removed. The pile of finished blocks grows. All around the quarry, there is activity, but it is not frantic. There is no shouting, no rushing. Just the sound of tools against stone, the grunting of men lifting heavy hammers, the scrape of copper on rock, the quiet conversations of workers taking brief rests in shade. The sun climbs higher. The heat becomes oppressive. In the middle of the day, work slows. The men seek shade, drink water, eat bread and onions. Then, as the worst heat passes, they return to their tasks. This scene repeats itself day after day, month after month, year after year. Slowly, The mountain of cut stone grows, thousands upon thousands of blocks, each one cut by hand, shaped by human effort. No machines, no power tools, just muscle, simple metal and stone tools, and an infinite supply of transporting the blocks. The blocks have been cut. They lie in the quarry, shaped and ready. Now they must be moved to the pyramid site. For blocks quarried on the Giza Plateau itself, this journey is relatively short, perhaps only a few hundred meters. For blocks coming from Tura, across the Nile, or granite from Aswan, the journey is far longer and far more complex. The ancient Egyptians had no wheels suitable for moving heavy loads. The wheel had been invented, but not in a form robust enough to carry tons of stone across sand and rock. Instead, they used sledges, simple wooden platforms with curved runners, like the runners on a sled. A stone block is rolled or levered onto a sledge. Ropes are wrapped around the block and the sledge, securing them together. Long ropes are attached to the front of the sledge. And then the pulling begins. Teams of men, perhaps 20 or 30 for an average block, more for larger ones, take hold of the ropes. They lean forward, muscles tensing, feet finding purchase in the ground. Someone, perhaps a foreman or an overseer, calls out a rhythm. The men pull together, in unison. The sledge resists for a moment, friction holding it to the earth. Then it begins to move, slowly at first, then more steadily as momentum builds. But the friction is enormous. Stone dragging across stone, with scraping over rock and sand. It would be nearly impossible without a simple but crucial technique. They wet the sand. In a tomb painting from the 12th dynasty, archaeologists found a scene depicting exactly this process. 172 men are shown pulling a massive alabaster statue on a sledge. Standing on the front of the sledge is a man pouring water from a jar onto the ground just ahead of the runners. This is not merely symbolic or ceremonial. Modern experiments have confirmed that wetting the sand reduces friction by up to 50%. The water causes the sand particles to stick together, creating a firmer, more slippery surface. The sledge glides more easily, and far fewer workers are needed to move each block. So as the teams pull the sledges across the plateau, water carriers walk ahead, pouring water onto the path. The ground becomes damp, almost muddy in places. The sledges slide more easily. The work is still hard, terribly hard, but it is possible. The men pulling the ropes are not slaves. This is important to understand. For thousands of years, people believed that the pyramids were built by slaves, by Hebrew captives, or prisoners of war forced to labor under the whip. But archaeology has revealed a different truth. The pyramids were built by free Egyptian workers, most of them farmers from villages up and down the Nile Valley. These workers came to Giza during the flood season, when their fields were underwater and no farming was possible. They came for 3 or 4 month shifts, living in a workers' village built specifically for them. They were organized into crews with names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure. They were fed well, receiving bread, beer, meat from cattle and sheep and goats, onions and fish. Archaeological excavations of their village have revealed bakeries capable of producing thousands of loaves of bread each day, breweries, storage facilities, even medical care for workers injured on the job. They were not doing this out of the goodness of their hearts, nor were they forced. They came because it was their duty, a form of labor tax owed to the pharaoh. They came because they were well-fed and well-housed, better than they might be in their home villages. And they came because they believed in what they were building. The pyramid was not just the pharaoh's tomb. It was a national project, a monument that would ensure Egypt's place in the cosmos, that would help their king become a god and watch over the land forever. So they pulled the ropes, day after day. The sledges moved across the plateau one at a time, sometimes several at once, carrying their precious loads. The path from the quarry to the pyramid site became worn, the rock polished smooth by thousands of sledges passing over it. In some places, workers laid down wooden beams or paving stones to create a more even surface. In others, they simply cleared away the loose sand and rock, exposing the bedrock beneath. For stone coming from farther away, the Nile River itself became the highway. Boats were essential to ancient Egypt, and the Egyptians were skilled boat builders. They constructed large wooden vessels capable of carrying enormous loads, as well as smaller boats and rafts. When the Nile flooded each year, the water level rose by 7 meters or more, and the river spread out across the valley. Ancient engineers cut channels through the natural levees along the river's banks and dredged basins near the pyramid site. These basins connected to the Khufu branch of the Nile, a waterway that no longer exists, but which once flowed along the western edge of the Nile's floodplain, much closer to the pyramids than the river is today. During the flood season, when water levels were highest, boats could sail or be towed almost to the foot of the pyramid plateau. Stone from the Tura quarries would be loaded onto boats on the eastern bank. The boats would cross the river and sail to the harbor complex at Giza. There, the stone would be unloaded onto sledges and dragged up to the construction site. In 2013, archaeologists discovered a papyrus journal at an ancient port called Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast. This journal was written by a man named Mirror, an inspector who oversaw teams of workers during construction of the Great Pyramid. Mirror's journal is matter-of-fact, almost mundane. It records trips transporting limestone from Tura to Giza. One entry reads, Inspector Mirror left Taras Alpha with his team on a boat filled with limestone blocks to Al-Kufu, spending the night at Shikufu. Day after day, Mirror's crew made these trips. Load the stone, sail to Giza, unload, return, repeat. 200 workers and his crew alone, making trip after trip, hauling stone across the water. The granite from Aswan faced an even longer journey. Aswan is 800 kilometers upriver from Giza. The granite blocks, some of them massive, weighing 40 tons or more, had to be floated downstream on enormous rafts or boats. This could only be done during the flood season when the river was high and deep enough to carry such weight. The journey might take weeks, the boats drifting slowly with the current, crews of men working the oars and steering to avoid sandbars and shallows. When at last the boats reached Giza, the granite was offloaded and dragged on sledges to where it was needed. Most of the granite went to the interior of the pyramid, to line the king's chamber and the grand gallery, spaces that would be sealed inside the stone mountain and never seen again after the pharaoh's burial. It is hard for us, living in an age of trucks and cranes and highways, to comprehend the scale of this logistical achievement. Every single block had to be moved by human power, ropes and sledges and boats and endless patient labor. The organization required was staggering. Someone had to coordinate the quarries, ensuring a steady supply of stone. Someone had to manage the boat crews, scheduling trips so that stone arrived when it was needed, not too early, not too late. Someone had to feed thousands of workers, arranging for cattle to be driven from farms in the delta, for grain to be brought from storage, for water to be delivered. And yet it worked. Block by block, the stone arrived at the pyramid. The pile of materials grew. The work continued. Steady as the river's building the foundation. The first stones are placed not at ground level, but slightly below it. Workers dig shallow trenches around the perimeter of the base, cutting into the bedrock to create a level platform. Then the first course, the first layer of blocks, is laid directly on the bedrock itself. These first stones are the most important. If they are not perfectly level, if the base is not true, then every block placed on top of them will inherit that error, and the error will compound with each new layer. So the masons work with extraordinary care. Each block in this first course is carefully positioned. Workers use wooden mallets and copper crowbars to shift the stones fraction by fraction until they sit exactly where they should. They check the level constantly, using square levels and plumb bobs, simple tools, but effective. A plumb bob is just a weight on a string. When hung freely, the string is perfectly vertical due to gravity. By comparing the edges of the stone blocks to this vertical line, workers can ensure that the blocks are not tilted. The square level is slightly more sophisticated. It consists of a wooden frame in the shape of the letter A, with a plumb bob hanging from the apex. When the level is placed on a surface, the plumb bob hangs down and should align with a mark at the center of the crossbar connecting the two legs of the A. If it does, the surface is level. If not, adjustments must be made. Between the stones, workers pour a thin layer of gypsum mortar. This mortar is not like modern cement. It doesn't hold the blocks together through its own strength. Instead, it serves as a lubricant, allowing the massive blocks to be slid precisely into position. The gypsum mortar stays soft for a time, letting workers make fine adjustments. Once the block is in exactly the right place, the mortar slowly sets, creating a thin, even layer that helps distribute the weight more evenly. The first course is laid from the outside edges working inward. The four corners of the pyramid are established first, then the edges, then the interior is filled in. This pattern will repeat with each new layer. As the stones are placed, workers carefully check the diagonals of the square base. If the base is a perfect square, then the two diagonals, lines drawn from opposite corners, should be exactly equal in length. Any difference indicates that the square is not true, and corrections must be made before moving to the next layer. This work is slow. Placing each block might take an hour or more. Adjusting it to perfect position might take longer still. But there is no alternative. The foundation must be perfect, around the perimeter of the first course. The blocks are larger and more carefully shaped than those in the interior. These outer blocks will be visible, at least initially, so they receive more attention. The inner blocks, which will be completely hidden once the pyramid is complete, are rougher. Some are little more than irregularly shaped chunks of limestone, fitted together like a three-dimensional puzzle. The work continues through the long summer days. The sun beats down on the plateau. The workers labor in its heat, their skin darkening, their hands growing callous from handling the rough stone. They drink water constantly, brought up from the river in large ceramic jars. They eat bread baked in the workers' village, thick flatbread made from emmer wheat, heavy and filling. When the day grows too hot, work slows or stops altogether. The workers retreat to whatever shade they can find. They rest. They talk. They mend their tools. They wait for the afternoon, when the sun is lower and the air is slightly cooler, before resuming their work. Weeks pass, then months. The first course is complete. The entire base of the pyramid, more than 5 hectares, is covered with stone. The foundation is leveled to within a few centimeters across its entire expanse. The corners are square. The edges align with the cardinal directions. The bedrock beneath is solid and strong. Now the real work can begin. Now they will start to build upward, layer by layer, toward the sky, raising the stones. The pyramid rises in steps, each layer slightly smaller than the one below, creating a step pyramid shape that will later be filled in and covered with smooth casing stones. But for now, during construction, the pyramid looks like a giant staircase, with each step about 70 centimeters high, the height of one block. The challenge facing the builders is obvious. How do you lift 2.5-ton blocks of stone up onto each successive layer? The first layer is easy enough, as the blocks can be dragged on sledges across the ground. But the second layer is 70 centimeters up. The third layer is another 70 centimeters higher. By the time you reach the 50th layer, you are 25 meters above the ground. By the 100th layer, 50 meters. By the 210th layer, the top of the pyramid, you are 146 meters up, taller than a 40-story building. The ancient Egyptians had no cranes, no pulleys, no block and tackle. They had ramps, levers, ropes, and human muscle. Ramps are the most widely accepted solution to the problem of how the blocks were raised. Archaeological evidence confirms that ramps were used in pyramid construction. Remains of ramp structures have been found at several pyramid sites. The question is not whether ramps were used, but what kind of ramps and how exactly they functioned. The simplest ramp design is a straight ramp leading up one side of the pyramid. As the pyramid grows taller, the ramp is extended, maintaining a shallow slope that workers can manage. Modern experiments suggest that a slope of about 1 in 10 is workable, 1 meter of rise for every 10 meters of horizontal distance. This means that to reach the top of a pyramid 146 meters tall, a straight ramp would need to be 1,460 meters long, nearly 1.5 miles, and to be wide enough for teams of workers to pull sledges up it and for other teams to return down it. The ramp would need to be quite broad, perhaps 6 or 7 meters wide. The amount of material required to build such a ramp would be enormous, possibly more material than the pyramid itself. And after the pyramid was completed, the ramp would have to be dismantled and all that material removed. This seems inefficient, but not impossible. Some scholars argue that the ramp material was later incorporated into the pyramid's outer layers, or used for other construction projects nearby. Another theory proposes a spiral or wraparound ramp that circled the pyramid as it rose, like a path winding around a mountain. This design would use less material than a straight ramp and would take up less space on the plateau. Workers would drag the blocks up this spiraling path. At each corner, they would pivot the sledge on wooden posts, changing direction. Modern experimental archaeology has shown this is feasible. A third theory, proposed by architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, suggests an internal ramp. In this model, the first 30% of the pyramid was built using a conventional external ramp. Then, as the pyramid grew higher, an internal ramp spiraling upward inside the pyramid was used to transport blocks to the upper levels. This would explain why so little evidence of massive external ramps has been found. They were only temporary and relatively small. The internal ramp, if it exists, would still be inside the pyramid, hidden within its structure. The truth is likely that the Egyptians used multiple methods. Different pyramids might have employed different ramp designs. Even within a single pyramid, different techniques might have been used at different stages of construction or for different types of blocks. Regardless of the exact method, the fundamental process was the same. Blocks were loaded onto sledges at the base of the ramp or at an intermediate level. Ropes were attached. Teams of workers, perhaps 30 men for an average block, more for heavier blocks, took hold of the ropes and began to pull. One step at a time, they hauled the blocks up the ramp. The work was exhausting. Moving a block up a ramp required far more effort than moving it across level ground. The workers pulled not only against friction, but against gravity itself. Every meter gained was a victory. The men leaned into the ropes, their feet slipping sometimes on the ramp surface. Overseers called out rhythms to coordinate the pulling. Water carriers continued to wet the ground ahead of the sledges, reducing friction as much as possible. It might take an hour or more to move a single block from the base of the pyramid to its final position high on the structure. Then the sledge had to be maneuvered into position. The block shifted and adjusted until it sat perfectly. And then the whole process began again with the next block. Some blocks, particularly the heaviest ones, may have been raised using a combination of ramps and levers. Once a block reached a level where it needed to be placed, workers could use wooden levers and fulcrums to lift one end of the block slightly, slip pieces of wood underneath, then lever up the other end, adding more wood. By repeating this process, the block could be walked upward a few centimeters at a time until it was high enough to slide into its final position. This levering technique is simple but effective. It requires only basic tools and can move extremely heavy loads through small increments. It is slow, patient work, but the ancient Egyptians had time. As the pyramid grew taller, the top surface became smaller. The workers had less room to maneuver. The ramps became longer and steeper. The work became harder, but it never stopped. Block after block, layer after layer, the pyramid rose. From a distance, from a valley, or from a river, people could watch the pyramid growing. The progress would have been almost imperceptible from day to day. But month to month, year to year, the change was undeniable. The step silhouette grew taller, more imposing. The artificial mountain continued to rise toward workers' daily life, while the skilled masons and engineers directed the placement of each stone, and the quarry workers cut new blocks. The vast majority of the workforce consisted of laborers whose task was simply to move stone. These were the men who pulled the ropes, who carried water, who maintained the ramps, who hauled supplies. They came from villages throughout Egypt, arriving at Giza to fulfill their obligation to the pharaoh, to participate in this great national project. The workers' village at Giza was discovered by archaeologist Mark Leaner and his team from Ancient Egypt Research Associates. Located about 500 meters south of Sphinx, this village housed thousands of workers during the pyramid's construction. It was not a temporary camp of tents, but a planned settlement with mud brick structures, paved streets, and organized facilities. The workers lived in long barracks-like galleries, each housing perhaps 40 men. These were not spacious or luxurious accommodations, but they provided shelter from the sun and the occasional desert winds. The structures were simple: mud brick walls, wooden roof beams, packed earth floors. Workers slept on wooden beds or on platforms of packed earth, with perhaps a shaped stone for a pillow. Life in the workers' village revolved around labor, food, and rest. The workers rose before dawn when the air was coolest. They walked or were transported to the construction site. There, they worked through the morning hours, pulling sledges, moving stone, clearing debris, whatever task their overseer assigned them. Around midday, as the sun reached its peak and the heat became nearly unbearable, work stopped. The workers retreated to shade, to the workers' village, or to temporary shelters near the pyramid. They rested through the worst of the heat. They ate their midday meal. Then, in the late afternoon, they returned to work until sunset. The food provided to the workers was substantial and varied. Archaeological evidence from bakeries and food processing areas reveals that workers received daily rations of bread, beer, meat, and vegetables. The bread was thick and heavy, made from emmer wheat, a grain well suited to the Egyptian climate. Each worker might receive several loaves per day, providing the bulk of their calories. Beer was a universal beverage, consumed by everyone from the highest officials to the lowest laborers. It was thick and nutritious, more like liquid bread than modern beer, with a low alcohol content. It provided calories, hydration, and nutrients. The brewing process also made contaminated water safe to drink, as the fermentation killed harmful bacteria. Meat was provided regularly, an unusual luxury for common people in the ancient world. Cattle, sheep, and goats were raised specifically to feed the pyramid workforce. Archaeologists have excavated massive deposits of animal bones near the workers' village, testament to the scale of the feeding operation. The meat was likely distributed in the form of stew or roasted over fires. Fish from the Nile supplemented the diet, as did vegetables like onions, garlic, and lentils. Onions in particular were prized, both for their flavor and their believed medicinal properties. They could be eaten raw, cooked in stews, or dried for storage. This diet was far better than what most Egyptian farmers ate in their villages. It was one of the incentives for participating in the pyramid project. A man working at Giza could feed himself better than he could at home, and he might even be able to send extra rations back to his family. The social structure within the workers' village was hierarchical, but not rigid. Workers were organized into crews, each with its own overseer. These crews competed with each other, not in a hostile way, but as a form of motivation. Graffiti found inside the pyramids includes marks left by work gangs, tags identifying which crew moved which block. Names like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure suggest a sense of pride and camaraderie. Medical care was available for workers injured on the job. Excavations have uncovered skeletal remains showing heel fractures and successful amputations. Someone whose arm was crushed by a block could have the limb removed and survive, healing enough to return to lighter work. This indicates that workers were valued, that their lives are worth, that they were not disposable. During their rest periods, workers had leisure time. They played games. One popular game was Senate, a board game involving strategy and chance, played on a grid with pieces moved according to the throw of sticks. Boards for Senate have been found scratched into the floors and paving stones near workers' quarters. Men gathered in the evenings to play, to talk, to tell stories. They also had religious rituals. Small shrines and altars have been found in the workers' village, places where laborers could make offerings to the gods, pray for safety, give thanks for another day survived. The pyramid itself was a religious project, but so too was the daily life of those who built it. As weeks turned into months and months into years, the pyramid grew. The workers who arrived at the beginning of the project, when the base was just being laid, watched the structure rise higher and higher. Some of them would work for an entire season, return home for the agricultural work, then come back the following year to find the pyramid noticeably taller. The progress was visible, tangible. They could point to specific blocks and say, "I moved that one. That stone is there because of me." This connection to the work, this sense of participation in something greater than oneself, was perhaps the most powerful motivation of all. The pyramid was not just the pharaoh's tomb. It was Egypt's pyramid, a monument to the collective effort of the casing stones. As the pyramid neared its full height, attention turned to its outer surface. The stepped appearance of the inner core, convenient for construction, was not how the pyramid was meant to look. The final vision was a smooth, gleaming structure with perfect triangular faces rising from the desert, a mountain of light. To achieve this, the builders applied a layer of fine white limestone over the stepped core. These were the casing stones, blocks of the highest quality limestone quarried at Tura, across the Nile. Unlike the rougher core blocks, the casing stones were cut with extraordinary precision. The Tura limestone was prized for its fine, uniform grain and its pure white color. When polished, it could shine like marble or even glass, reflecting the intense Egyptian sun with almost blinding brightness. This stone was reserved exclusively for the outer layer, where it would be seen, where its beauty and quality would be on display. Quarrying the Tura limestone required even more care than cutting the core blocks. The stone was more valuable. The cuts had to be more precise. Each casing stone was shaped as a rectangular block on 5 sides, but the 6th side, the one that would form the outer face of the pyramid, was cut at an angle. This angle matched the slope of the pyramid side, approximately 51 degrees. When placed correctly, the angled face of each casing stone would align perfectly with its neighbors above, below, and to each side, creating a continuous smooth surface. The precision required was extraordinary. The blocks had to fit together so tightly that, as ancient observers noted, you could not slip a knife blade between them. Transporting the Tura limestone was a major operation in itself. The quarries were located about 15 kilometers from Giza, but the journey was made by water. During the flood season, boats loaded with casing stones crossed the Nile and sailed to the harbors at Giza. Thousands of these stones, each weighing about 15 tons, made the journey. Once at the pyramid site, the casing stones were dragged up the ramps like the core blocks before them, but their placement required even greater care. Each stone had to be positioned so that its angled face was perfectly aligned with the pyramid's intended slope. Any error would be visible, a bump or indentation, in what should be a flawless surface. To achieve this precision, masons used several techniques. Before placing each casing stone, they carefully prepared the surface it would rest on, making sure it was level and smooth. They used gypsum mortar, which served both as a lubricant during placement and as a thin, even bed that would harden to lock the stone in position. The outer face of each casing stone was initially left slightly rough, with a few centimeters of extra material. This protected the stone during transport and placement. Only after a section of casing was in place, after the stones were locked together and secure, did the final work begin, the polishing. Teams of skilled stonemasons worked their way across the pyramid's surface from top to bottom, carefully shaving away the excess material and smoothing the surface. They used copper chisels for the initial shaping, removing the rough protrusions. Then they switched to abrasives for the polishing, sandstone blocks and fine sand mixed with water. The polishing process was slow and painstaking. A mason would rub the sandstone against the limestone back and forth, for hours. The hard quartz grains in the sandstone gradually wore away the soft limestone, creating a smooth surface. Water was constantly applied to flush away the limestone dust and to keep the abrasive particles working efficiently. As the surface became smoother, finer and finer abrasives were used. Eventually, the masons achieved a finish that was almost glass-like. The white limestone glowed, reflecting light, creating a surface so smooth that you could see your reflection in it. Imagine the Great Pyramid when it was first completed around 2560 BC. The step construction core was completely hidden beneath a seamless coat of white limestone from base to summit. The four triangular faces were smooth and perfect, angled at precisely 51 degrees. The entire structure gleamed brilliant white under the desert sun, visible for miles in every direction. At certain times of day, particularly at dawn and dusk, the reflected sunlight would have made the pyramid appear to glow from within a mountain of captured light. Ancient visitors described the sight as overwhelming, almost supernatural. The pyramid did not look like a building made by human hands. It looked like a piece of the sun itself, brought down to earth. The symbolism was intentional. In Egyptian cosmology, the pyramid represented the rays of the sun descending to earth, a stairway between the human world and the divine realm. The pharaoh buried within was not merely dead. He was transformed, ascending to join the gods in the sky. The brilliant white casing made this symbolism visible and tangible. Some scholars believe that the tips of the casing stones were painted with gold leaf or covered with electrum, a gold-silver alloy, creating even brighter accents that would catch the light. While most of the casing stones were white, there may have been decorative bands or patterns in different colors at certain levels, though evidence for this is limited. What is certain is that the ancient Egyptians understood the power of appearance. The pyramid was not just structurally sound. It was beautiful, designed to inspire awe and wonder. The effort invested in polishing the casing stones, which served no structural purpose, demonstrates that aesthetics mattered as much as engineering. Over the millennia, nearly all of the original casing stones have been lost. In the 14th century, a massive earthquake loosened many of them. Subsequent rulers and builders, recognizing the value of the pre-cut, high-quality limestone, removed the casing stones and used them to construct mosques, fortresses, and buildings in Cairo. By the 19th century, only a few casing stones remain at the base of the pyramid, and even fewer survive today. The pyramid we see now, with its stepped, weathered appearance, is actually the internal core structure never meant to be visible. It is like looking at the wooden frame of a house after all the walls have been stripped away. The true pyramid, the completed pyramid, was that brilliant white monument that gleamed in the Egyptian sun for thousands of years before time and human need dismantled its outer skin. Capstone. Every pyramid needed a capstone, a final stone to complete the structure. This was not just any block. It was the pyramidion, a small pyramid-shaped stone placed at the very apex, the point where the four triangular faces met. The pyramidion was carved from a single block of stone, usually fine white limestone or hard granite, depending on the pyramid. It was shaped as a perfect miniature pyramid, its slopes matching the angles of the main structure. In many cases, the pyramidion was covered with gold leaf or electrum, making it shine even more brightly than the white casing below. The ancient Egyptians called the pyramidion the Benben, connecting it to their creation mythology. According to their beliefs, the universe began in watery chaos, and the first solid ground that emerged from these primordial waters was a mound, the Benben. The pyramidion atop the pyramid symbolized this moment of creation, the point where earth and sky met, where creation itself began. Placing the pyramidion was both an engineering challenge and a sacred ceremony. The capstone had to be lifted to the summit of the pyramid, 146 meters above the ground for the Great Pyramid, and positioned with absolute precision. Any error would be visible from miles away, marring perfection of the structure. The most likely method involved extending construction ramps all the way to the summit. Workers would drag the pyramid ion up these ramps on a sledge, just as they had moved all the other blocks. Once at the top, they would use levers and wooden props to carefully maneuver the capstone into its final position, aligning it so that its edges matched perfectly with the edges of the casing stones below. The placement of the pyramid ion marked the completion of the pyramid. It was a moment of celebration, the culmination of decades of labor. Ancient reliefs and texts suggest that this moment was accompanied by ceremonies. Priests would perform rituals, offerings would be made to the gods, and the populace would celebrate the successful completion of this enormous national project. The pyramid ion was often inscribed with religious texts and royal names. It bore images of the sun god Are and dedications to Pharaoh. In later pyramids, from the Middle Kingdom onward, inscriptions on pyramidia became more elaborate, featuring prayers and spells to protect the king in the afterlife. Sadly, the pyramid ion of the Great Pyramid has never been found. Whether it was stolen in antiquity, destroyed, or simply lost is unknown. Ancient writers from the classical period already described the pyramid as lacking its capstone, suggesting it disappeared early in the pyramid's history. Without the pyramid ion, the sum of the Great Pyramid is not a point but a small flat platform, approximately 10 meters square. Despite its absence, we know what the pyramid ion would have looked like based on surviving examples from other pyramids. The pyramid ion of the Red Pyramid at Dashur, built by Khufu's father Sneferu, has been found and reconstructed. It is made of white Tura limestone and would have fit perfectly at the summit of that pyramid. Other pyramidia, from later periods, survive in museums, giving us a clear understanding of their form and purpose. The missing pyramid ion of the Great Pyramid remains one of the enduring mysteries of the structure. Some have speculated it was made of solid gold, making it an irresistible target for thieves. Others suggest it was destroyed during one of the many earthquakes that have struck the region over the millennia. A few even propose it was never placed, that the pyramid was left incomplete for reasons we do not understand. Whatever the truth, the pyramid ion was meant to be the crowning achievement, the final touch that transformed the pyramid from a pile of stones into a complete, sacred monument. Its presence would have completed the symbolism, marking the pyramid as a ladder between earth and heaven, a pathway for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the stars. Time and completion. The construction of the Great Pyramid took approximately 20 years, according to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt around 450 BC and recorded the stories told of him by Egyptian priests. Modern estimates, based on the volume of stone used and reasonable assumptions about workforce size and productivity, broadly agree with this timeline. 20 years is a long time in a human life. Workers who arrived as young men to lay the foundation stones were middle-aged by the time the pyramid ion was placed. Some did not live to see the completion. Children born in the workers' village in the early years of construction grew up watching the pyramid rise, their entire childhoods measured by its growth. The pace of construction varied. In the beginning, when the massive base was being built, progress was rapid. Thousands of blocks could be placed each day as workers spread across the enormous foundation. But as the pyramid grew taller, as the working surface at the top grew smaller, the rate of block placement necessarily slowed. Estimates suggest that during the peak years of construction, workers placed an average of about 300 blocks per day. This is a staggering pace. But with a workforce of 20,000 to 30,000 people organized into efficient crews with well-established routines, it was achievable. Not every day was a working day. Religious festivals, flood season interruptions, and periods of rest meant that actual working time might be only 200 to 250 days per year. Even so, over 20 years, this allowed for the placement of the roughly 2.3 million blocks that form the pyramid's core. As the project approached completion, the focus shifted. The core was finished. The internal chambers were sealed. The casing was being polished. The thousands of workers who had moved stone were no longer needed in such numbers. Many returned to their villages permanently, their service to Pharaoh complete. Specialist craftsmen remained, putting the finishing touches on the casing, carving inscriptions, preparing the mortuary complex that surrounded the pyramid. These were the artists and the priests, the men who transformed raw construction into sacred architecture. When at last the pyramid ion was placed and the final casing stone polished, the ramps could be dismantled. This alone was a massive undertaking. The ramps, built of millions of tons of earth and rubble, had to be carefully taken down. The material was either carried away or spread across the plateau, smoothing the ground around the pyramid. As the ramps came down, the true shape of the pyramid was revealed for the first time. Throughout construction, the ramps had obscured parts of the structure. Workers had seen individual faces, sections of the pyramid, but never the whole. Now, as the last ramp was removed, The entire monument stood revealed. It rose from the plateau like a geometric mountain, its white sides perfect and gleaming, its summit crowned with a golden pyramid ion. The four triangular faces converged at a single point, visible against the blue Egyptian sky. From every direction, from the Nile Valley, from the desert, the pyramid dominated the horizon. The ancient Egyptians gathered to witness this unveiling. The farmers from the villages, many of whom had worked on the pyramid, priests from the temples, officials from the pharaoh's court, perhaps even the pharaoh himself, Khufu, now an old man, looking upon the monument that would house his body for eternity. There was no ribbon cutting, no speeches as we might expect at a modern building's opening. Instead, there were rituals. Priests purified the pyramid, walking around its base, sprinkling holy water, burning incense. They performed ceremonies to dedicate the structure to the gods, to activate its power, to ensure that it would serve its purpose of protecting the pharaoh's body and facilitating his journey to the afterlife. There was no ribbon cutting, no speeches, as we might expect at a modern building's opening. Instead, there were rituals. Priests purified the pyramid, walking around its base, sprinkling holy water, burning incense. They performed ceremonies to dedicate the structure to the gods, to activate its power, to ensure that it would serve its purpose of protecting the pharaoh's body and facilitating his journey to the afterlife. And then, silence. The construction was over. The thousands of workers dispersed, returning to their farms, to their villages, to their ordinary lives. The construction village at Giza slowly emptied. The bakeries stopped producing thousands of loaves. The beer breweries fell silent. The medical facilities closed. Within a few years, the village itself was abandoned, slowly being buried by the drifting sands. The pyramid remained. It stood in the desert, a testament to human capability, to organization, to the power of collective effort sustained over decades. It was the tallest structure in the world and would remain so for nearly 4,000 years, until construction of medieval cathedrals finally exceeded its height. But at the moment of its completion, it was simply there, a mountain of stone and human will, rising from the sand, reflecting the sun, marking the spot where a king would sleep forever, the silent years. After the celebration of its completion, after the ceremonies and the rituals, the pyramid settled into its primary purpose. It was a tomb, and like all tombs, it waited for its occupant. Khufu, the pharaoh for whom the pyramid was built, eventually died. His body was mummified according to the elaborate rituals of ancient Egypt. His internal organs were removed, preserved, and placed in canopic jars. His body was dried with natron, wrapped in linen, adorned with amulets, and placed in a wooden coffin that was itself placed inside a stone sarcophagus. The funeral procession carried the pharaoh's body from the palace to the pyramid. It traveled along a causeway, a covered corridor that connected the valley temple at the edge of the Nile to the mortuary temple adjacent to the pyramid's eastern face. This causeway was itself a remarkable structure, its walls decorated with reliefs showing the pharaoh's accomplishments, his victories, his offerings to the gods. Inside the pyramid, the passages had been prepared. The entrance on the northern face, 20 meters above ground level, led to a descending corridor that dropped at a sharp angle into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. This corridor branched. One path led to a chamber carved deep in the rock, a chamber that was begun but left unfinished. Another path, the ascending corridor, climbed upward into the heart of the pyramid. This ascending corridor was initially blocked by massive granite plugs, huge blocks of stone that had been held in place by wooden props during construction. After the pharaoh's burial, these props would be removed, and the granite blocks would slide down, sealing the passage forever. Beyond the ascending corridor lay the Grand Gallery, a stunning architectural space. It was 8 meters tall and 46 meters long, with a core-belled ceiling that created a soaring, cathedral-like volume. The walls were polished limestone that gleamed in the torchlight. This gallery was not just a passage. It was a statement, a demonstration of mastery, a space designed to inspire awe even in death. At the end of the Grand Gallery, a low passage led to the king's chamber, the heart of the pyramid. This room, approximately 10 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 6 meters tall, was built entirely of red granite transported from Aswan. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all were granite, polished to a smooth finish. In the center of the chamber sat the sarcophagus, a massive rectangular box carved from a single block of red granite. The lid had been placed beside it, ready to be slid into position over the pharaoh's coffin. The sarcophagus was too large to fit through the passages of the pyramid. It had been placed in the chamber during construction, before the roof was added, a detail that demonstrates the careful planning that went into every aspect of the structure. Above the king's chamber, hidden within the pyramid's mass, were 5 additional chambers, stacked one above the other. These relieving chambers served to distribute the weight of the pyramid away from the king's chamber ceiling, protecting the burial space from collapse. The ceiling of the uppermost relieving chamber was made of massive limestone blocks arranged in an inverted V, creating a primitive but effective arch that channeled the enormous weight outward to the pyramid sides. The pharaoh's body was placed inside the coffin, which was lowered into the sarcophagus. The lid was slid into place. Priests performed final ceremonies, reciting spells from pyramid texts, ancient incantations designed to protect the king and guide him to the dangers of the afterlife. Then the priests withdrew. They backed out through the low passage, through the grand gallery, down the ascending corridor. Behind them, workers released the wooden props. The granite plugs slid into place, blocking the ascending corridor with their enormous mass. Additional blocks were piled in the descending corridor, further sealing the interior. The entrance of the pyramid was concealed with casing stones, made to blend seamlessly with the surrounding surface. Within hours of the burial, no visible sign of the entrance remained. The pyramid appeared as a solid, unbroken mass of stone. And so it remained. Decades passed. Centuries. The immediate descendants of Khufu built their own pyramids beside his, creating the complex we now call the Giza Plateau. The Old Kingdom, the age of the Great Pyramid builders, eventually ended, giving way to periods of instability, then to new dynasties with different customs and priorities. But the pyramid endured. It stood through the Middle Kingdom, through the New Kingdom, through the conquest by Alexander the Great, through the Ptolemaic period, through the Roman occupation. It watched as new civilizations rose and fell, as languages changed, as religions were replaced, as the memory of the pharaohs faded into legend. The pyramid itself became ancient, a relic of a past so distant that even the Egyptians of later eras did not fully understand it. They knew it was a tomb, knew it was built by their ancestors, but the specifics, the names, the stories, became confused with myth. Yet the structure remained sound. The engineering was so solid, the foundation so well laid, the construction so carefully executed, that despite earthquakes, despite erosion, despite the passage of millennia, the pyramid held together. The interior chambers remained intact. The walls did not buckle. The passages did not collapse. This is perhaps the ultimate testament to the skill of the ancient builders. They constructed something that would outlast not just their own lifetimes, but their entire civilization. They built for eternity, and in this, they succeeded. Reflection and legacy. It is difficult for us, living in an age of steel and concrete, of computer-aided design and hydraulic lifts, to fully comprehend what the construction of the pyramids truly meant. We can calculate the tonnages, estimate the workforce, reconstruct the techniques. But numbers and methods cannot capture the human dimension of the achievement. Imagine dedicating 2 decades of your civilization's resources to a single project. Imagine organizing a workforce of tens of thousands, feeding them, housing them, coordinating their labor day after day, year after year. Imagine doing this with the technology of the Bronze Age. Copper tools, rope, wood, and human muscle. The pyramid was more than a construction project. It was an expression of belief, a physical manifestation of the Egyptian understanding of life, death, and the cosmos. They believed that the pharaoh was divine, that his death was not an ending but a transformation. They believed that by building this mountain of stone, by preserving his body in its depths, by surrounding him with texts and offerings, they could ensure his successful journey to the afterlife. And in ensuring his eternal life, they ensured the continued prosperity of Egypt. The pharaoh, now a god, would watch over his people from the heavens. He would intercede with other gods on behalf of the living. The pyramid was thus not just a tomb, but a tool, a machine for manufacturing divinity. The workers who built the pyramid did not see themselves as slaves toiling under the lash. They saw themselves as participants in a sacred act. They were building a house for a god. In doing so, they were securing the future of their nation, their families, their own hopes of the afterlife. The bread and beer they received were compensation. Yes, but the true payment was spiritual, the knowledge that they had contributed to something eternal. This communal sense of purpose is difficult for modern individualistic societies to grasp. We think in terms of personal achievement, personal benefit. The ancient Egyptians thought in terms of collective responsibility. The pyramid was Egypt's triumph, not Khufu's alone. Every worker who moved a block, every artisan who carved a relief, every baker who made bread for the workforce was part of a vast collaborative effort that transcended individual lives. The pyramid teaches us about the power of organization. Without computers, without written blueprints in our modern sense, without mechanical equipment, The ancient Egyptians coordinated a complex operation that lasted 2 decades and involved tens of thousands of people. They did this through hierarchy, clear chains of command, division of labor, and cultural cohesion. The project succeeded because everyone, from the pharaoh to the lowliest water carrier, understood their role and performed it. It teaches us about the value of precision, the extraordinary accuracy of the pyramid's alignment, the levelness of its base, the fit of its stones, all demonstrate that the ancient Egyptians cared deeply about getting things right. They could have built a rougher, less precise pyramid in less time with less effort. But precision mattered to them. It was worth the extra effort because a pyramid was meant to be perfect, worthy of housing a god. It teaches us about patience. 20 years. 7,300 days. Each day, workers moved stone. Each day, the pyramid grew by a tiny increment. No one working on a single day could see dramatic change. But over months and years, the accumulated effect of all those small daily efforts resulted in something magnificent. The pyramid is a monument to steady, persistent work, to the power of small actions repeated countless times. And it teaches us about durability. In an age where buildings are often designed to last mere decades, where planned obsolescence is a business strategy, the pyramid reminds us that humans are capable of creating things that endure. The ancient builders succeeded in their goal. The pyramid has stood for 4,500 years. It will likely stand for thousands more. Long after our steel towers have rusted and our concrete has crumbled, the pyramid will remain a testament to human capability. As we come to the end of our slow journey through construction of the pyramids, let us return once more to the Nile at dawn. The same river that witnessed the beginning of this project still flows. The sun still rises over the eastern desert. The sand still shifts in the wind. The pyramid stands on a plateau, no longer brilliant white, but worn and weathered. Its casing stones long since removed, its core exposed. Yet it endures. It has outlasted the civilization that built it. It has become a symbol not just of ancient Egypt, but of human ambition itself. When we look at the pyramid today, we are not just looking at a pile of stones. We are looking at time made visible. We are looking at the labor of thousands of people long dead, people whose names we will never know, whose faces we will never see, but whose work remains. Every block was cut by human hands. Every stone was moved by human strength. Every layer was placed with human care. The pyramid is not a mystery. It is not the work of aliens or lost ancient technology. It is the work of people, ordinary people, doing extraordinary things through patience, organization, skill, and time. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can imagine yourself among them, standing on the plateau at Giza 4,500 years ago, feeling the sun on your skin, tasting the dust in your mouth, hearing the sound of copper on stone, the creak of ropes, the quiet conversations of workers taking a rest. You are holding a rope, one of many. The rope stretches ahead of you, held by dozens of others. It is attached to a sledge, and on the sledge sits a block of limestone. Someone calls out. You pull. The sledge moves. One more block, climbing the ramp. One more stone, added to the mountain. One small contribution to something that will outlast you by thousands of years. The pyramid grows, slowly, patiently, inevitably, day after day, block after block. Time itself made solid. And there, on the horizon, the river flows. The sun sets. The stars emerge. And the work continues, as it will tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Until one day, years from now, the last stone is placed. The mountain is complete. And it stands, silent and eternal, beneath the Egyptian sky. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. If you enjoyed this slow exploration of how the ancient pyramids were built, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are many more stories from the ancient world waiting to be told, many more quiet journeys through history. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with wonder.